My name is Jack Turnbull, UK Assistant Director for the Mutual UFO Network, lifelong ufologist. I've been obsessed with the subject since I was 15, when as a teenager I witnessed something I couldn't explain. And indeed I still can't. For 60 years now, I've been researching, learning, gathering evidence, and I've been drawn to one conclusion. Aliens are here now. I'm going to recount some of the most extraordinary case files and show you how, on the basis of sheer probability and numbers, we can prove that there is life out there. In my view, the public are now beginning to step out of the dark, and thus begins the revelation. E.T. If you'd done a survey 50 years ago, if you'd asked 100 people their opinion, did they believe or did they think that extraterrestrial intelligences were visiting this planet, you'd have been lucky if you got more than 1%. Now today, you do the same survey today, and you're talking about over 50%. That's how much this has swung to the positive. My remit is very simple. I want to present you with 3 case files that contain the necessary ingredients in support of my argument. One of which contains absolute, categorically provable evidence that E.T. is here now. The encounter of UFOs by the Japanese airline 1628, also known as the Alaskan Incident, is in many ways unique, as all the evidence contained within it is entirely provable. Yeah, it's the 17th of November, 1986. We have a jumbo jet, cargo jumbo jet, carrying a consignment of Beaujolais wine en route from Paris to Tokyo. Is due a scheduled stop at Anchorage to refuel. There were 3 cabin crew on board. You had Captain Kendo Teruchi. He is a pilot with 10,000 flying hours experience and an ex-fighter pilot. You had his co-pilot, Takanori Tamafuji, and the flight engineer was Yoshio Sasuba. They were due to stop and refuel at Anchorage and were flying at the time of this incident, directly over the Alaskan tundra. Shishuri noticed on his radar screen that he was being approached from behind rapidly by 2 aircraft. And very soon afterwards noticed 2 rather unusually shaped aircraft appear directly below the jumbo jet. They were flying, one on top of the other, and remained so for about 5 minutes, during which time he said they were glowing, luminescent, becoming bright, then getting duller, and so on. They were so close, he could feel the heat coming from them hitting his face. All 3 members of the cabin crew could see this and bore witness to this. They contacted air traffic control again, and they confirmed that they could now see the aircraft.
Defender 1628, sir, if you're able to identify the type of aircraft, and see if you can tell whether it's military or civilian.
Defender 1628, we cannot identify the type, but we can see navigation lights and turnover lights.
After about 10 minutes, at about 5:23 p.m.,
they veered off, heading east, and went out of view, and were replaced by another craft that appeared very close to the jumbo jet. It was huge and almond-shaped, in the words of the pilot, Cerrucci. He was so unnerved by the presence of this craft, so intimidated, that he asked Alaskan Air Control for a change of direction, to which permission was given.
I'm going to request you make a right 360-degree turn and advise me what your traffic does then. Thanks, 360.
Cerrucci landed at Anchorage for refueling, and in doing so, this huge craft disappeared. He then continued on his journey to Tokyo and had no further account, or there was nothing added to this incident. Nothing else happened. He arrived in Tokyo and a day or two later held an interview, a press interview with the local newspaper Kyodo. The newspaper contacted the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, in Anchorage and spoke to a man by the name of Paul Stuck, asked him to verify and confirm that the account given by Cerrucci was indeed accurate. And he did say that they had encountered aircraft of unknown origin that they couldn't identify. In other words, UFOs. Paul Stuck contacted FAA head office and spoke to John Callahan, who was the chief investigations man for the entire outfit. Very prominent position, powerful. He asked Paul Stuck to forward to him for his attention all relevant data, which duly arrived. He then synchronized the voice recordings with the radar data and was astonished at the findings, so much so that he immediately went to see his superior, Vice Admiral Donald Engen, who, after seeing and hearing the evidence, was so alarmed that he called an emergency meeting. It was attended in due course by the FBI, the CIA, and President Reagan's own personal scientific study team. At the end of this meeting, they were instructed very clearly by the CIA that this event never took place. This meeting never took place. And they gave out veiled threats to all people who were present. Unknowns to the CIA, John Callahan had kept copies of all of the readings on the radar screen and the voice recordings and the synchronized version, which showed absolutely that there were aircraft present during this encounter. The FAA issued a news bulletin to say that, having studied the case in great detail, they have concluded that there was no evidence to suggest the presence of any other craft. John Callahan retired a couple of years later and attended the UFO disclosure conference that was held in Washington, during which he presented the evidence that he had retained. He put forward this evidence and in front of the camera said categorically that hitherto he'd been a skeptic, he hadn't believed any of it. In fact, he said that people who were in that frame of mind were not the full package, his actual words. And here was a man now who had completely changed his mind based on the evidence that had been at his disposal, that he had been unable to deny. Raises the question, not so much did it happen, more to the point, what exactly were they that was seen?
While a trove of evidence may back up the Alaskan incident, it is still a great deal to comprehend, as indeed are many aspects of this matter. In order to get our heads around the possibility of ET life, I believe we need to begin by accepting one great fact, the concept of infinity.
Infinity, okay. Well, it's something we find it very hard to get our heads around. It's kind of beyond our comprehension. Endlessness. Out there, the universe continues ad infinitum. We need to find an end because we work with beginnings and ends. We're programmed that. We're wired for beginnings and ends, and we find it hard to step outside of that. And yet, infinity is right there, right in front of us. I take the piece of wood, I cut it in two, I half it. And then I half the two halves, and I go on subdividing, half, 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 ad infinitum. I'll eventually reach the stage where there isn't any wood left to see. But there will be a fraction pertaining to a piece of wood that you can't see. So theoretically, although you can't see it, if there's a number relates to it, it exists. And that's infinity. It's right there in front of you. In relation to ET, I would link infinity in the sense that the possibilities are endless. The only thing it contains us is our thinking. Out there, it's all possible. And the possibilities, mathematically, based on what we know, are staggering. That's just what we know. You know, 70 billion trillion stars in the universe that we can see. That's just a little bit we can see. God knows what's behind that. That's the point. So the possibilities are endless. The only thing we're containing is our own thinking would contain us. You've got to step outside of that to get your head around this, or even start. Rendlesham Forest is in Suffolk in southern England. It's about 70 miles from London. It is now an abandoned military base, but in the 1980s it was occupied by the American Air Force and was a high security base that contained 12,000 military personnel, of which there were a good number of security people. On the 26th of December 1980, two patrolmen were patrolling the east end of the base. That was John Burroughs and Sergeant Bud Stevens. And while doing this, they noticed in the woods strange lights were flickering, red, green, yellow. And puzzled by this, they headed for the main gate, where they picked up a phone and rang the front desk and said, look, there's some strange stuff going on in the woods, there's some very strange lights we can't explain, what do you want us to do? And they sent down, as part of the response, Sergeant Jim Peniston, who teamed up with them. And after discussing and being shown the lights flickering in the woods, in the forest, Peniston and Burroughs then made their way into the woods towards the lights. And as they entered the forest, the first thing they noticed was that their wireless sets were beginning to make crackling noises. Something was affecting them, some kind of electrostatic discharge seemed to be affecting them. They also said they were aware of something like electrostatic in the air. They could feel it on their skin, on their clothes. Something didn't feel quite right. Now the multicolored lights have now changed, and they were no longer red, green and yellow. It was now a very bright white light. And they were heading straight for it. And in due course, through the trees, they arrived at a clearing where the light was there. And suddenly it dimmed, and they were able to see very clearly on the ground a triangular-shaped craft. They both proceeded, and Peniston ended up touching this, he said, and he felt it was smooth like glass and felt warm to the touch. He noticed that there was no obvious signs of landing gear, engine, lights, windows, nothing you would associate with a normal traditional aircraft. Just a triangular shape, but he noticed on it peculiar markings that he likened on an interview later to hieroglyphics, and he took out his notebook and he began to copy them into his notebook. Suddenly, the bright light returned, blinding them in its intensity, and they stepped back and took cover in the trees and were astonished to see this thing go from a standing start in a second. Blink of an eye, he said, up and gone, like that, just gone, vanished. Never seen anything move as quick. Back to the camp. The following day, Peniston was preying on his mind. He decided he was going to go back into the woods and find the clearing. He took some plaster of Paris, his intention being to try to find where the craft had been stationary on the ground, to try to find some signs of it. In due course, he found these dints, and he made plaster of Paris casts of these. He now felt much more comfortable. He had his military issue camera with the photographs on it. He had the notes in his book and the strange shapes he'd seen on the side of his craft, and he had the plaster casts of the indentations in the ground. It's now the 28th of December, 1980, 2 nights after the original incident with Peniston and Burroughs. Holt, Charles T. Holt, the Deputy Base Commander, is attending an officer's dinner in the mess. One of the security men approaches and asks to see him. And Holt goes out, and he's told by this chap, he said, this military man, he said, it's back. And Holt said, what's back? He said, "The UFO, sir." Well, Holt, at this point, thought, enough is enough. I've been hearing rumours for 2 days about people on this base seeing some strange stuff in the skies, and this is beginning to give me the grip. I've got to sort this out. He says, right, let's get it sorted once and for all. Leaves the dinner, immediately sets up a cordon around Rendlesham Forest, and gets a group of guys together, armed with light-alls, Geiger counters, camera, and essentially his tape recorder.
Segmentation. You just saw a light where? Wait a minute, slow down. Where? Right on this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flash right there, sir. There it is.
Hey, I see it too. What is it?
We don't know, sir.
So can I get some of it? Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. You'll see out maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. I'm going to switch off. Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like the pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye.
It was coming closer. It appeared to be zigzagging through the trees and coming towards them. He's now getting a bit alarmed, and he's coming out with things like,
This is unreal.
Then it seemed to be backing off, and they went forward following it, and it went out into a field, at which point it moved at an incredible speed up and away, and it was almost a repeat of the previous night. Holt and his entourage headed back to the base, and I think they went to bed that night in a high state of confusion, questioning many things. The next day, Holt submitted a report. Base became a beehive of activity for several days after that, but shrouded in a cloak of secrecy. It was kept under wraps. And in due course, of course, the Rendlesham Forest incident gradually faded away and became less of a problem. But it left the contenders here: Charles T. Holt, Jim Penniston, John Burroughs, with vivid memories of what they'd seen. And they would, of course, relate their stories afterwards.
Well, my own experiences got me on the bandwagon for this extraordinary subject. Discovering the likes of Rendlesham Forest and the Alaskan incident inspired me to join a team who were making groundbreaking research into UFOs and ET. MUFON.
Well, MUFON began. It was originated by a couple of guys in America who wanted a bit of a mission, who were interested in the subject, intrigued by it, and wanted to shed some light on it. So they started this organization, and it has, in the years since, decades in fact, it's quite old, has spread its arms right across the globe, is in many countries, where it has investigators who investigate sightings and pass reports back to a central database on the findings. But in spite of that, we haven't found the smoking gun yet, which is absolute proof. We've got pretty damn close. I am an investigator with MUFON. I joined MUFON about a year ago. I've had an ongoing interest in this subject for years, and I stumbled across it actually on the web, and I approached them. And it turns out that they obviously assigned field investigators, and in due course I was assigned as a field investigator for MUFON. I am now, as part of that process, entitled to receive case files, which I do regularly, which I contact on the telephone. Without organizations like MUFON, and this whole thing has been shrouded in mystery and locked up behind closed doors deliberately, in my view, for years. We would be like ostriches with our heads stuck in the sand. We'd have no idea. We would be in a dark room being fed a load of crap. A bit like mushrooms, really. So I think they offer a very good service in that respect.
We're on our way to Barnsley to interview a man by the name of Andre Smike. Now, Andre is a retired police officer who was for many years with the South Yorkshire Police Force. He had an experience 25 years ago while, in the course of his duty, he was out on patrol one evening, and he saw something that can only be described as extraordinary. He had an extraordinary encounter, and this is what he's going to tell us about on interview.
So, yeah, on this particular night shift, I was on patrol duties in uniform in a marked police vehicle in deep car. My attention was attracted to something in the night sky ahead of me, and what I could see basically was a white searchlight beam coming down from the sky at a 45-degree angle to the ground. And at the time I thought, this has got to be like a police helicopter, but I knew that the helicopter wouldn't have been up in the air at that time of night. At that time it used to operate out of a base in Wakefield in West Yorkshire, and they had a policy that it didn't fly after midnight. I'd not heard anything on any police radio traffic, so I decided to check up with both my own control room and the South Yorkshire Police Force control room, using two different radios to see whether the helicopter was actually airborne. I was told categorically by both stations there was no police helicopter airborne. After I'd used the police radios, the next thing I knew was that the white searchlight on this object switched off, and then the object moved very rapidly towards where I was parked in the police vehicle.
You could see it at that point, could you?
I could see something, but it were, to me at that time, to be honest, it was a shock. I think to some degree I were in a degree of shock, because I knew it was like an innate fear that something had suddenly come towards me. As I was sat in the vehicle, the next thing I knew is that all of a sudden the area above and around my vehicle were illuminated with what I can only describe as a brilliant...
Ultraviolet?
A brilliant blue light.
Yeah.
I mean, I describe it as like a neon light. When you see a neon light sign, you have that type of blue.
Yeah.
Or you get the blue off a sunbed when people are on sunbeds.
Yeah.
And it was lighting up an area all around the outside of my vehicle. And I sat in the vehicle and basically I didn't get out of it. I like, in it, to some degree, froze. I mean, I weren't scared stiff, but it was frightening.
Yes.
So I sat in the vehicle, and then after something like a minute or so, the blue light went out. I couldn't hear any noise. I couldn't hear any noise from this craft approaching me. So I jumped straight out of the driver's door and looked directly above me. And as I looked directly above me, in the sky, night sky above the vehicle, I could see a huge black triangular shaped object that were more or less hovering above the police vehicle, but it was moving very slowly, very slightly, continuing to move across the vehicle. Not long after that, it moved away very rapidly, accelerating and moving on its original flight path directly over me, above me, to continue towards the south. And when it did that, it just did it silently, without any acceleration noises, thrust, anything that you'd typically hear from a conventional aircraft. It flew over. I was still able to track it with my eyesight, the direction it was going in, and it flew over me. Then it turned left, and as it turned left, it went a distance, and then all of a sudden, it just literally, like as if it threw itself in reverse, it went back to the point that it had turned.
Yep.
And it did that, and then it took off again back in its original direction, going like in a southwesterly direction. And when I saw that manoeuvre, it was just mind-blowing, because I thought, I cannot envisage any normal conventional aircraft making a manoeuvre like that, silently, at speed, being able to manoeuvre, throw itself into reverse and then back into forward again. I just cannot imagine any conventional fixed-wing aircraft or stealth aircraft doing anything like that. After I'd seen that, I got back on the police radio to my control room and I told them what I'd seen. I said, this object that I've seen, that I queried, that I thought were an helicopter, has come above me. I told them that it were a huge black triangular object. it's made certain manoeuvres. In my mind, it is a UFO. That's what I described it as, a UFO. And I told them which direction it had gone in. So I told them what I was doing, and I actually set off. And I tried to go out towards the Peak District National Park, basically to see if I could see any further sightings of this craft. I'll describe it as a craft.
Yep.
To see whether it made any other manoeuvres, whether it were going to put its lights on again, whether it were going to land or anything. Didn't see any further sightings of this craft. Got out into the back of beyond, basically, where you're out on your own, it's pitch black, there's nothing, nobody about. And then obviously I was getting a bit worried that I was putting myself in a position that I might regret. And I decided to call off my own sort of pursuit, if you want to call it, or observations. And then basically I left it. Later that night I regrouped with two other police officers who were on duty. At the time of the incident, they'd been working from Deepcar, but they were in a car together down Outer Bridge, which was about 6 miles away from where I'd witnessed my incident. And they did comment to me that they'd seen the bright blue lights, what they described as bright blue lights, in the sky over the Deepcar to Balstaston area from where they were at Outer Bridge.
Right.
But they couldn't see anything. They didn't know what it was. All they knew is there was this phenomenon of some bright blue light.
Was it beaming down?
I don't know. To be honest, it was something, I just think, all I knew is that they'd seen some bright blue light.
Yeah.
But funnily enough, that was something I don't think I asked them, to be honest, at the time. They were just bright blue light. But other thing I'd add as well is that the night this incident happened, to me, visibility were good. I had like a clear, unobstructed view of this object, both as it approached me, hovered over me, and then carried it on its flight path away from me. I was wearing spectacles for driving, police-approved specs. Obviously, you were subject to rigorous eyesight standards for driving police vehicles, so you were checked annually. So I'd got corrected vision, so my sight were good to see what I saw. And I've no doubt in my mind what I actually witnessed.
It's almost impossible to explain the impact of witnessing a UFO sighting, the likes of which Andre had. It can change your whole perception of the world which we live in, and will often stay with you for the rest of your life. It was indeed my own sighting that triggered my journey on this incredible road.
I was 15 years of age, living in Edinburgh. By pure chance, one day whilst out walking my dog, I saw a white disc cross over from the southeast to the northwest, unmistakable. And let me emphasize, what I saw was a disc. I didn't see a spot of light flickering or traveling. I saw a disc with sides. This thing that I saw was seen by two other people at the same time. In fact, they saw it before I did. Moments before, a guy sitting on a roof, a joiner, actually exclaimed, "There's a flying saucer." I'm quoting him verbatim. At that particular time, there wasn't any space debris. There was none. So we can discount that. The speed discounts a weather balloon because jet stream speeds don't exceed 150 miles an hour, and this thing was doing well over that. So it wasn't a weather balloon. So we've narrowed it right down. Exactly what it was, I've got absolutely no idea. But it was something very unusual.
Of course, the more witnesses to a UFO sighting, the harder it becomes to debunk. From the 3 pilots flying over Alaska to the group of military personnel at Rendlesham. But what if 62 children all swore they had seen a UFO and an alien being step out of it? In what is one of the most extraordinary cases in recent history, that was exactly what happened in Ruwa, Africa.
It's the 14th of September, 1994. The continent is Africa, the country Zimbabwe. Specifically, the capital Harare, a township about 20 miles outside of Harare called Ruwa. Located there is a private school by the name of the Ariel School. The time is 10 a.m. The children are outside taking their morning break. A large number of these children see in the sky Their words, 3 silver balls with flashing red lights. As they watched the balls moving around, one of them gradually descended. And they said it either hovered very close to the ground or it landed just to the edge of their playing area where there was a fence. A little man gets out, described as follows: about 1 meter high, wearing a shiny black suit, dark hair, or appeared to be dark hair down to the shoulders, very pale face, but most distinctly the eyes. That really scared them. It then fixed its gaze on the children and stared at them for seconds while they all stood transfixed. It then got back into the craft and they all saw it fly off. Now, there were 62 of these kids who bore testimony to this incident. It very quickly drifted out and people outside would begin to hear about this encounter. And within a couple of days, an investigative journalist by the name of Cynthia Hind arrived with her entourage. She'd been given permission by the headmaster, Colin Mackay, to interview the children and did so at length. She asked them to draw on a piece of paper the craft. And making allowances for the different skill levels and the age differences, it was pretty clear that 62 children were on the same page, telling the same story, giving the same account. And after spending a day or two there, she on camera had filmed the interviews, said with a look of incredulity on her face, actually uttered the immortal words, very appropriate words: "Why would 62 children lie?" It's a good point. About a week or so afterwards, it reached the ears of a famous, celebrated Harvard psychiatrist called John Mack. And upon hearing of this tale, was intrigued enough to want to take it further and went down to the school. Saw the headmaster and got permission to carry out a series of interviews, which he did over a spread of 2 days, during which time he taped the conversations and filmed them. It was all recorded. After 2 days of deliberation and in questioning by a professional man of very high standing, he held up his hands and said on camera, "It is what it is." This is a scene from Rouen, where the children were asked to draw what they saw. You can see that they're placing tremendous emphasis on the eyes. Indeed, one of the drawings actually shows the eyes protruding from the head, out of scale, which I think is reflective of how much they were influenced by the image in the eyes, which scared them. Basic psychological tests for children is when they're trying to establish which parent is dominant, they ask the child to draw their parents, irrespective of scale, because kids don't pay much attention to scale in that respect. And the one that they draw the largest will be the dominant parent. This here clearly shows how much they were influenced by what they saw, and the eyes in particular, all pointing very clearly at what for them was a very real situation. I think which indicates the truth of this event. Anyone who's had children would know how hard it is to get them on the same page for anything. Indeed, how would you get 62 kids to stay on the same page for 2 days under interrogation? I think it's shouting out, this is a true account of an alien craft that landed and an alien being got out of it, strangely featured, which left a distinct impression of these kids. That's beyond question, I think, if you look at this rationally. The power base have their own reasons for keeping things under lock and key, safely tucked away from the public. There's a large fear element here and uncertainty as to how they would react in the event of full disclosure. My opinion is that, of course, some would overreact. On the other hand, I think a large percentage would take it on board and perhaps come out of the tunnel at the other end better for it. In the words of a famous president, Abraham Lincoln. You can fool some of the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time. But you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Two years ago, at the conference, disclosure conference in Washington, Paul Hellyer, ex-Minister for Defence for Canada, now retired, ex-member of the G8 Council, and he comes out at this conference and declares,
UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally.
that is one hell of a statement. Now, I've been on the page for this subject for years, but even that stretched my elastic. Why would a man who has the history that he's got make such an outrageous statement? We can label it into three possibilities, eh? He's either a habitual liar, can't help himself, or slightly off his beam end, or he's telling what he believes is the truth. I know which one I would choose as being the more probable. Now, there you go. Sand. On this planet, there's one hell of a lot of it. If I was to put that onto a table and ask you to count every grain, there'd be two conclusions. One, you'd reach a pretty high number, and two, you'd be there for quite some time. It's estimated by those who know these things that out there, they estimate there to be more planets and stars than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of the Earth. The number is mind-boggling, almost incomprehensible. And where do we fit into the scheme of this vastness? The Earth? One grain of sand. And that's it.
When people think of ET life, their natural thought process is to look towards the skies, planets, UFOs. But what about USOs?
Unidentified submersible object. There have been, over the years, thousands of accounts. People who have seen objects that they couldn't relate to, didn't know what they were, entering and leaving water. Various types, the sea, the ocean, the lakes. So I'm going to give you a count of a small number, a snippet of these. There were tens of thousands on which to draw from. I just picked three at random, 3 or 4. On the 8th of February 1960, the Argentinian Navy were carrying out maneuvers in their waters. Whilst doing so, they picked up on their sonar systems 2 unidentified objects, which they thought at first were American submarines. They pursued them, and in due course, witnesses claimed that they came out of the water, broke apart, and disappeared. March 1963, American submarines, while carrying out an exercise about 100 miles off the coast of Puerto Rico, picked up on an object, a large object, traveling at 150 knots. It was estimated to be 20,000 feet down. Now, at that time, the crush depth for a submarine was 7,000 feet, so it was very obvious that whatever this was, it was beating our technology by a mile. They'd said its acoustic signature was identified as being propeller driven, and other than that, they were unable to get any more information. The military tracked this object for 4 days and eventually lost it. Alexander the Great, in 329 AD, according to ancient writings that have been found and deciphered, actually saw, coming out of the Jaxartes River in India, metallic objects that were shiny that eventually flew away in the air. So intrigued was he by this that he actually called together a team of people to look into it, and even kitted out some kind of a pretty basic diving bell, trying to find out what he had seen. He was convinced he'd seen some kind of life form, according to the writings. He then, for the following 6 years, just before his death, became obsessed with this. There have been tens of thousands of accounts of craft that have been seen by wholly reliable witnesses, leaving and entering the water. 2/3 of the planet are covered by water. There are areas of this planet, water is over 30,000 feet deep. The Mariana Trench being one of them, 6 miles. You could hide Mount Everest in that amount of water and you wouldn't see the tip. If you want to hide, the water's the best place to do it. Well, there's a thought. Why are we making this documentary? Well, we hope in due course that it will be a revelation to people who hitherto were perhaps sitting on the fence, perhaps unaware, didn't have enough knowledge in which to base a real opinion, hadn't taken a close enough look at this. We've taken 3 cases: Rendlesham Forest, the Alaskan incident, and finally the children in Rua. We could have taken, there are hundreds of thousands out there, some even more graphic. These were picked because they were considered to be appropriate. So let's examine them closely then. Let's look at the 3. Let's take the children at Rua. 62 children between the ages of 6 and 11 witnessed something incredible. They're now 30 years of age. They've been interviewed again, and they're still sticking rigidly to their story. So who would point the finger and say they're lying? Let us take the Alaskan incident. Here we have a jetliner flying from Paris to Tokyo. You have a pilot, a co-pilot, and a flight engineer. They see some alarming stuff right outside the cockpit of the plane flying at 35,000 feet. Were they imagining this? No, because it was all being recorded by ground radar, both military and civilian. They were tracking this and picking up the recordings at the same time. In due course, all the information was sent to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority's head office in America, and got into the hands of John Callahan, high up in the chain of command. He, a total skeptic with regards to UFOs, people who believe this sort of stuff should be locked away, suddenly gets together and synchronizes the voice recordings with the sonar stuff, the radar, and suddenly thinks, whoops, something's going on here. This doesn't fit. Finally, Rendlesham Forest, military establishment, trained personnel. You've got security men here, highly trained. You've got the third in command, Lieutenant Colonel Charles T. Holt, and they're all in the wood watching some strange stuff going on. Afterwards, Holt signs an affidavit, swearing to the truth of his testimony. So I wonder who is going to then say, on the basis of just 3 simple case files here, everybody's wrong, everybody's telling lies, they're all mistaken. In the words of John Lennon, conspiracy silence is deafening.